have you got a picture of Adolf Hitler on your wall?
Well, he had some good ideas. He wanted Germany for Germans. And we want Britain for British, for the whites, for English people.
He also believed in repatriation, didn't he?
He did.
And what did that lead to?
Well, he took it a bit too far.
He went too far with it.
Blackburn, Lancashire. John Smythe and Martin Smethurst are new recruits to an extreme right-wing racialist political party, the National Party of the United Kingdom. They also support another racialist organisation, the National Front. Both parties want the compulsory repatriation of all coloured people from Britain. As support for the extreme right-wing political parties has grown, racial violence has increased in the town. Tonight, World in Action reports on Blackburn, the only town in Britain which has elected National Party councillors and the main stronghold of the National Party.
That the whole thing was the fault of a gang of useless, good-for-nothing, no-good, black punks!
John Tyndall, chairman of the National Front, addressing party supporters in Blackburn a few weeks ago. In just 3 years, the number of people voting for racialist candidates in the town has trebled. Over 200 people attended this meeting to hear National Front leaders John Tyndall and Martin Webster.
The decision before you in this next decade or so is, do you want the British race to survive, or do you want this country to become occupied by a load of khaki-coloured multiracial bastards? That is the choice before you.
Both Webster and Tyndall have violent pasts. During the 60s, Tyndall organised, equipped and armed a paramilitary organisation.
One way you can do that, through the leadership...
Webster assaulted a visiting African head of state. Both men belonged to Colin Jordan's National Socialist Movement, a pro-Nazi group.
Thank you.
No free speech for fascists! Smash the National Party! No free speech for fascists! Smash the National Party!
Until 10 months ago, the National Front was the only racialist party with significant popular support in Britain. But last January, this man, John Kingsley Reid, then the Front's national chairman, broke away from the Front, saying he wanted to rid himself of its Nazi connections. Reid formed his own party, the National Party of the United Kingdom.
We will fight you back, and we'll fight you with every bone, every nerve, every feeling, every ounce of blood we've got. We will have our country back!
John Kingsley Reid is 40. He was born and brought up in Blackburn. In May this year, Reid was one of 2 National Party candidates elected onto Blackburn Town Council. Blackburn became the only town in Britain with council members belonging to a racialist party whose major policy is the compulsory repatriation of coloured people from Britain. There are 13,000 Asians in Blackburn. Most of them come from villages in northwest India and Pakistan. They were encouraged to come here by the British government in the late 50s and early 60s to work in the textile industry. Most of them are Muslim and deeply religious. As the local population has moved out into new housing developments, the Asians have moved in to the terraced houses built for the mill workers in the last century. Gradually, ghettos are growing up in the poorer parts of town. There's been racial prejudice in Blackburn since the immigrants arrived, but this year tension has increased and serious violence has erupted. Jim Roberts teaches immigrant children and is on the Community Relations Council. He's noticed the growing fears of the immigrants.
One often finds an air of suspicion. I think many of them are rather afraid of approaches from white people. I think a few years ago, people who might have been racially prejudiced would have been ashamed to admit it. Now they see no harm in it. I think people like the National Front, National Party, have apparently made racialism respectable.
Dr. Muhammad Bari has been a family doctor in Blackburn for 11 years. He's experienced the increase in violence.
A person who were feeling quite happy a few years ago doesn't feel any more like that. He's always apprehensive, a bit fearful to go out. It is getting worse every day. I was kicked by a bunch of hooligans I didn't realize it could happen to me, but then it opened my eyes that if it happens to me, so what might happen to an ordinary working class population?
In September, Blackburn's 14 Asian doctors told the police that they were afraid to go out at night when patients called them, and they asked for police protection. Other Asians are even more vulnerable than the doctors. Kadim Quraishi, a factory worker, came to Blackburn from East Africa 4 years ago.
The immigrants here are frightened, They're frightened of going downtown alone, afraid of being attacked, perhaps, by some National Party fanatics. I personally wouldn't bother going downtown on my own. Women normally used to go out shopping on their own, but it doesn't happen now. And there's been a lot of physical hostility to the immigrant population, beating up, windows being smashed, violence on large scale, yes.
Last June, the Indian Workers' Association in Blackburn compiled a list of violent actions against the immigrant community. The list included a lot of damage to property and some cases of assault on individual immigrants. Weldon Action talked to 4 victims of the violence. Zubida Patel, punched at night by a white man.
He must have saw my door chain into the fella, and he pushed the door, and he bashed me onto my nose, went away running.
Mohammed Rafiq, attacked at night on his bus.
2 young lads get on my bus and they're shouting me, the blackie bastard. And when they get up, they kicked me, you see.
Nurul Islam, beaten at night by white youths.
One kicked me in here, and another blown me in here, and another hit me in back on my head with a bottle.
Sarfraz Ali, beaten at night by white youths.
I've broken my ribs, nose, eyes, heads, just like that.
Many of the incidents take place here late at night in the bus station. The immigrants claim their attackers are white youths. John Smythe and Martin Smethurst used to beat up immigrants and have recently joined the National Party.
Have you ever attacked immigrants?
Well, we did before, didn't we?
Yeah.
What sort of things have you done?
Well, we've, gone up to them and fought them, just to show we didn't want them. Not because we dislike them personally.
Well, you've gone up to them in the street and done what?
Hit them.
There's a pair of you?
Yeah.
Have you ever been fined or in front of the courts for attacking immigrants?
Yes.
What happened?
I was fined £20 altogether for actual bodily harm and drunken disorderly.
What did you do to this immigrant?
I more or less stomped him, kicked his head in.
Why do you feel so strongly about the immigrants being here? Why personally do you feel that strongly about it?
They've no right to be here. They should be back in their own country.
Weldon Action asked National Party Chairman Councillor John Kingsley Reid if his party was responsible for encouraging racial violence in Blackburn.
No, not at all. The race hatred is there, I admit, and it's something I wouldn't like to see encouraged because it could lead to a great deal of violence. No, I think what we have done is polarised and proved that the majority of the people in this town just do not want killer immigration.
But you are extremely proud and open about being a racialist.
Oh, yes. I think any rational person should be.
We then told Councillor Reid that members of his party admitted to us that they had beaten up Asians.
You say members of our party. Do you mean members of our party whose membership cards you've seen, or people who say they would vote for us in the elections? For example, there's many people in jail who vote socialist, but the Socialist Party doesn't encourage criminality.
These are people who have, in fact, joined the National Party.
Are you sure of that?
They told us that they had.
How did you see their membership cards?
No, we didn't.
Because I am certain, and I know every member of the party in this town who has actually got a membership card, who is actually a member, and I'm certain that not one of those people will be involved in that sort of thing because they know damn well I wouldn't like it, and they know damn well it could lead to their expulsion from this party. And the bulk of the people who are members of this party are just ordinary, decent citizens who would not approve of violence at all.
When we interviewed Kingsley Reid, the membership cards of these 2 youths hadn't arrived. A week later, we went back to Blackburn to check that they were, in fact, genuine members of the National Party. They were proud to show us their membership cards. Racial violence was at its height in the early summer of this year in the run-up to the local elections. The right-wing National Front and National Party fielded 10 candidates. In wards like this, the racialists got their biggest vote ever. Many people were shocked, including the Labour MP for Blackburn, Barbara Castle.
I'm absolutely nauseated by the organised attempt that is being made by the National Party there to stir up racial prejudice. I don't think it existed to any serious degree until the National Party came along and stirred it up and have kept up the pressure of misrepresentations, in many cases downright lies, about the way, for instance, the immigrants are supposed to be treated by Social Security and so on. I think this is a horrible thing to have in the heart of a town which has always been renowned over the years for being one of the friendliest and most tolerant towns in Britain.
We asked John Simpson, a Conservative former mayor, about the National Party's policies.
But they don't seem to have any policies, apart from this question of racialism, which engenders unrest, hatred. It is involved with incitement, provocation, harassment. I'm quite certain that many of the people who voted for these candidates do not go along with this sort of thing.
In the May elections all over the country, the racialist vote improved, but Blackburn was the town where the National Party achieved its greatest success. World in Action has investigated the National Party in Blackburn and the men who run it. Councillor John Kingsley Reid, National Chairman of the National Party. John Frankman, the National Party councillor, elected in May. And Robert Horman, Chairman of the Blackburn branch of the National Party. First, John Frankman. He's 39 and a self-employed bricklayer. Only 6 weeks after his election last May, Frankman was forced to resign when it was revealed that he'd had a 6-month suspended prison sentence.
Driving without insurance is a criminal offence. Fair enough. It is a criminal offence by law. But the people of St Jude's Ward will back me when I stand again, and I certainly will stand again in 18 months' time. And wherever I stand in St Jude's Ward, whatever ward I stand in Blackburn, I will certainly win it.
Motoring offences aren't the only thing that John Frankman has been convicted for. His police record also includes convictions for theft and for living off immoral earnings. World in Action asked the National Party chairman, Kingsley Reid, if he was satisfied with John Frankman.
I am satisfied that ex-councillor John Frankman would have made an excellent councillor for this town. He was a man who genuinely meant to help the people. He had a strong personal appeal. His background, maybe he has done things wrong in the past, so have other people. A person is entitled to a mistake and is entitled to be believed once he's paid his debt. If it hadn't been for the malicious interference of the Labour Party, then perhaps John Frankman might still have been a councillor. I don't know.
We then asked Councillor Reid if he was aware of Frankman's long police record.
No, I am not. But I'm not interested because the statute of limitations doesn't permit you to say anything about it either.
Are you aware that, in fact, one of the convictions is for living off immoral earnings?
No, I am not, and I don't believe it. You'd have to prove it to me.
It is actually on his police record.
Well, if that is the case, it's extremely unfortunate that a man who has tried to make a new start and whom most people trusted and liked has got this background. It's unfortunate for him. It's very unfortunate for the party as well. All I can say is I don't know, and until it's proved, I will not believe it.
I, the undersigned, being the returning officer at the election of Borough Councillor for the...
Frankman's resignation caused a by-election in St Jude's Ward. The Labour Party won the seat back, but between them the right-wing National Front and National Party polled 31% of the vote. The National Party candidate for this by-election was Robert Horman, chairman of the Blackburn branch of the National Party. He's 22, an ex-Navy regular and unemployed. Robert Horman is the second man in the National Party World in Action looked at. On June the 11th, Robert Horman and John Frankman were involved in an incident at the town hall. Labour councillor Frank Hyam explains what happened.
I was stood over this side near the table next to Councillor Mrs Barker, the Liberal, and Royce Williams. A man came along, this young fella, a big fella, who I now know to be Mr Horman, and said certain things to me. I told him that I didn't know him and that I had really nothing to discuss with him and I didn't want to pursue anything with him at all. And at that stage I got a smack under the jaw and that was it. I was unconscious.
Hyam, came across to me, and he was poking and prodding me and calling me a Nazi fascist pig and telling me to go away and play with my swastikas. I don't have a swastika. I'm not a Nazi, nor am I a fascist. And when a man starts prodding me in an argument, in law, that is technically assault. And when it is a communist, like Frank Hyam, I'm afraid I saw red, and red being the operative word, and I hit him.
Councillor Hyam is not a communist. He's deputy leader of the Labour group on Blackburn Town Council.
Bob Horman had taken a great deal of provocation from this rather nasty little man and reacted with the explosive immaturity of a 22-year-old, which is unforgivable, for which he received a very severe reprimand from me and was given a real telling off, because one has to learn to control one's temper, even with somebody as provocative, dislikable and malicious as Councillor Frank Hyam.
The Reverend Royce Williams was actually there.
Well, as far as I could see, and I was standing next to Councillor Hyam, there was absolutely no provocation whatsoever. The attack was totally unprovoked and without any apparent reason.
Are you really a fit person to stand for public office?
I would say so, yes. You see, at the moment it seems to be a one-sided story as regards my actions that have happened in Blackburn. We take the thumping of Councillor Hyam in the town hall. I'm sure that gentleman would like to see me in court on some charge, but why didn't he press charges at that particular time? Because technically, within law, he had assaulted me first, and I could have turned around in court and said I retaliated.
Why do you think it is that you have this reputation for being a violent person?
Mainly the responsibility of the press, I believe. The people who know me personally are well aware I'm not a violent person. And I think it's just a responsibility of the press in the way they've reported certain stories and allegations made against me that seems to give the general public the opinion that I am a thug.
Are you actually happy that the chairman of the National Party in Blackburn, that the ex-councillor of the National Party in Blackburn, are men who very obviously are violent?
Poppycock, codswallop, provocative, stupid question.
But do you
they
not
are
think
not
it's violent?
obviously violent. Now let's be honest. If I am provoked sufficiently by anybody, eventually I might just lose my temper and bop somebody. That isn't violent. If Bob Horn was a violent man, he wouldn't have just hit Councillor Frank Hyam once.
Since World in Action finished filming in Blackburn, Robert Horman has been convicted of possessing a loaded firearm in a public place. He was arrested outside the house of a man who'd staged a burglary in his own home and blamed it on Asians. Finally, the chairman of the National Party, John Kingsley Reid himself. It's not just his colleagues who've been in the headlines. Kingsley Reid has been in the news in an incident involving an Asian woman doctor. On August the 3rd, Reid visited this surgery to see Dr. Azra, a family doctor who's practiced locally for 8 years. The purpose of his visit was to complain about the treatment of one of his constituents. Mary Sumner was in the waiting room collecting a prescription for her grandfather.
Well, he came into the doctor's surgery and he was shouting at the doctor and he was calling her names and telling her that she wasn't all good for a job.
What did you actually hear him say to her?
That she was stupid and she can't do a job properly, and he called her a bitch and bastard and things like that.
I did not burst in her surgery, and Dr. Azra, apart from being a person who is incompetent as a doctor, is also a liar.
But witnesses who were in the
There were
waiting
no witnesses
room,
who saw it, they're liars.
There were witnesses who actually heard you when you were in the surgery.
Undoubtedly they heard me. I've got a voice that carries, and I wasn't in a very good humour with the arrogant conceit of this semi-educated doctor.
But you did in fact call her an ignorant
I called her an ignorant immigrant, which she is.
On what do you base that accusation?
On her behaviour, on the way she spoke to me, on her complete lack of understanding of a number of issues regarding the treatment of certain of her patients. Particularly was she ignorant, and I mean ignorant in the sense that Lancashire people often use it, meaning ill-mannered. Particularly was she ill-mannered and ignorant in putting down the telephone on me when I first tried to speak to her.
But wasn't it more ill-mannered to be shouting and screaming at her?
I didn't shout and scream. I spoke very firmly.
But
as I would have spoken to any English doctor who was as incompetent.
Dr. Azra is a highly qualified GP who specialises in gynecology. She's well respected by her professional colleagues and has a reputation in Blackburn as a conscientious doctor.
There was an old lady in the waiting room.
Never saw her. If she was there, I never saw her. And if you're talking about the old lady from Rothsey Road, I suggest you check her antecedents before you believe her stories.
No, I wasn't talking about her. I was talking about another old lady who has a weak heart. Who
We
was
had all these
extremely
old ladies
frightened.
we had all these old ladies in the surgery, did we?
No,
it only
there was-
holds 7. How many old ladies could we get into the surgery? I say they're liars.
World in Action asked the old lady in the waiting room to take part in the programme, but she was too frightened to appear. Instead, we talked to the Wilsons, who voted for Kingsley Reid several times. Robert Wilson was also in Dr. Azra's surgery.
I respected Kingsley Reid up to that moment. What he'd done, I've read about him and seen him on the television, but after that moment, that completely turned me off him. And I wouldn't have anything to do with him again.
Why did it make you feel so bitter?
Because he was shouting and bawling and causing an affray. He was well, I thought he was trying to create trouble to try and draw attention to himself.
Kingsley Reid himself says that he actually deplores bully boy tactics.
Well, he's a hypocrite. That's all I can say, because he is the bully boy himself.
Since the incident was reported, Dr. Azra has had numerous anonymous, threatening and obscene phone calls. World in Action asked her to appear on the programme, but she refused for fear of further intimidation. She was so frightened by the constant threats that she asked for and received police protection and has now left Blackburn, although many of her patients pleaded with her to stay.
Well, I'm very upset at the moment, because I have been with Dr. Azra myself anyway for nearly 6 years, and what I've seen of Dr. Azra, she really is a good doctor, and I think it's a real shame, to lose her just because of something like this. And I think really that if this gets to blow over, that it'll happen not to only Dr. Azra, many more doctors. If Kingsley Reid himself thinks that he can do this once, he's going to do it again if he gets away with it.
We do not want to mix with blacks. We do not want to marry blacks. We do not want miscegenation, and we're damn well not going to have a multiracial society.
In the local press, Reid deplored the anonymous threats against Dr. Azra, but at a National Party meeting a week later in London, he had this to say.
And we've just been having a little bit of fun in Blackburn, as a lot of people would tell you. We've managed to ensure that one Dr. Azra fled Blackburn in a fit of blue smoke all the way down to London. Our loss is your gain, or the other way around.
Kingsley Reid split from the National Front this year to form his own party because he wanted to dissociate himself from the Front's Nazi fascist image. In a sworn statement to World in Action, a former close political ally and one-time personal friend of his claims that there's no difference between the two parties. James Cottrell worked closely with Reid for nearly a year and was co-director with him in a carpet business, which is now in liquidation.
Did you ever go to some private meetings, private gatherings in people's homes?
I've been in his home, and there's been people there, We were sat down having a drink after the pubs had shut one Sunday afternoon, and we got he said he had a treat for us, and this treat turned out to be 2 LPs of Nuremberg rallies, the speeches of Hitler at Nuremberg rallies. And one of my friends who were with me were a Jewish fella, and I frightened him a bit, so we went then, He personally admires Hitler, and his other generals, he admired them as well. And he said that he's always more or less sticking up for Hitler, saying that there weren't that many Jews killed. There were a lot of lies put out with that.
I would just categorically deny it, and I would have to ask these witnesses to be prepared to place on record with affidavit for the possibility of my suing them for libel, shall we say.
We told Councillor Reid that James Cottrell had sworn an affidavit saying he was with Reid when he played records of the Nuremberg rallies.
That's absolutely untrue. And I would like to take these people for perjury. I have no records of the Nuremberg rallies. I do have 1 or 2 records, I must admit, of German march music. But I also have records of Welsh march music, Irish march music, French march music, British march music. I happen to like marches.
We also have a sworn affidavit from another of Reid's former partners saying he saw records of the Nuremberg rallies in Reid's office. Up and down the country, racialist parties are gaining support. At the same time, there's been an upsurge of racial violence. Blackburn is perhaps the worst example, but in other parts of the country, the same pattern is emerging, and the Asian communities are being subjected to growing violence. We asked Conservative John Simpson, the former mayor of Blackburn, if he was worried by the growth in popular support for the National Party.
Very definitely. Very definitely. They are, without doubt, a neo-fascist type of group. And make no mistake about it, even if they succeeded in getting rid of every blackface and brownface and all the rest of it, they'd be looking around for the next ethnic group to deal with. It would be some religious group or some political group. They would simply have to find a scapegoat. And I think people should be very, very conscious of this fact, because therein lies a very, very great danger.